everyone, Jennifer here. I'm just popping into the very beginning again to ask you to please rate and review this show on any podcast platform that allows it, especially Apple Podcasts, because that really helps the show find new listeners. Okay, here we go.
So I got up Christmas Eve, hardest drive to go, to the crematory, to the mortuary, I should say, to pick up my mother. I picked up my mother with my oldest sister, and as we were driving back to my house, I get a call from my uncle, who is my dad's brother, and he informs me that my auntie and my grandma had to call the ambulance to pick up my dad because my dad was really bad.
There was the last normal day, the last day that things were the way they were before they weren't anymore.
We kind of all rushed out of the house and said a quick goodbye. And, little did I know that would be the last time I hugged my mom.
He yells and tells me he's getting ready to go. He said, "I'm okay. Just stay here. I'll be home in a few hours." We tell him bye and he leaves. That was the last time we ever saw him.
It's like the minute that helicopter hit the air, it just hit me what I was watching, because I knew he wasn't coming home and he knew he wasn't coming home.
For me, I took it more personally because I'm a nurse practitioner, and why can't I save him? I can help all these other people, and why can't I save him?
They're telling us that it was time, we needed to make a decision, we need to go ahead and just take him off the ventilator. And I was like, how do we know?
One thing I like to tell people is that if you lose somebody to COVID, your need to talk about the person you lost will outlast other people's desire to hear about it.
We make sure that our family members and loved ones' memories lived on. That's really important to me, is that people don't forget. I don't want to forget any of it.
So talk about them. Talk about them till people are sick of hearing about them. Because as long as you're still talking about them, they're never far away.
And the last thing that my mom said is, she said, when you get to heaven, we will look for each other.
Hello everyone, you're listening to For Those We Lost. I'm your host, Jennifer Sullivan. Thank you for being here. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com, or go to the website forthosewelostpodcast.com and click on the contact button, and you can reach me that way as well. Also, if you'd like to help support the show, you can do that at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. That link is also in the show notes. All right, let's get started with this episode. Today, I'll be talking to Loretta in California. Loretta lost both of her parents to COVID within a month of each other. Her mother, Maria Cuevas, died on December 10th, 2020, and her father, Cipriano Pedroza, passed away on January 8th, 2021. For context, we recorded this episode on June 23rd, 2022. When she reached out to me, Loretta said that losing her parents has impacted her entire life and that she wants to make sure they are remembered and are not just numbers, a feeling we can all relate to. And with that, I'd like to welcome Loretta to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So you are located in California.
Correct. I am in Anaheim Hills, California.
Okay. And we're talking today about your parents who both passed away of COVID in 2020 and then your father in early 2021.
Yes, that is correct. My mother in December 2020 and my father in January 2021.
Yeah. So I usually start in March of 2020, but because we're going to be talking about both of your parents, I'm going to figure that your family just rolled with changes in the lockdowns and working from home, and that you all, well, let me ask, how often did you see your parents from the time that March happened in the lockdowns until they got sick with COVID?
Yeah, so COVID started and we didn't know anything about it. We were just obviously careful and wanted to protect ourselves. So when it started, we were home. We did not see my dad the whole year. I actually did not want to be around because I did not know, how I didn't want him to get sick. I didn't want us to get sick. He was careful. He was home. My dad actually was already retired. And so I want to say the first time I saw my dad from March prior to his death, I want to say the first time I actually saw him was maybe in the beginning of August, because I know that I didn't even get to see him on Father's Day of 2020. And then my mother, I actually wasn't in touch with my mother. My mother and I kind of had a fallout, and I wasn't on speaking terms with her when COVID started. But I do know from my younger sister who was in touch with my mother that my mother was being super careful and staying home and taking care of herself, because my mother did have a lot of underlying medical conditions. So I was checking on my mom through my sister. And I know that she was being super careful at home. Yeah, so we were gosh, I mean, I had just had a baby and I didn't know, how COVID was affecting children. It was just such a scary time. So I would call my dad every day to make sure he was doing good, to say hello. We would do FaceTime. I was super close to my father. So it was super hard going through COVID not to be able to see him. I remember for Father's Day and other months, we would drive by the house and it would be sweet. He would walk up to the window, not come outside, but walk up to the window and wave hello to us. It was me and my boys and my husband, we would be in our car and just wave hello. So that was nice. But that's how careful we were. Even though we wanted to hug each other, we wouldn't. We would just, be careful and just say hello from afar.
Wow. Oh, that had to be hard.
Yes, it was very hard. And being that I had just had a baby in November of 2019, it was an exciting time for us because it was my third baby boy, and my father was so excited. And just being that he was retired, he was super happy to, spend time with the baby. And it was hard because my baby was only like 3 months old when COVID hit. So it was a hard time for us all.
Yeah. So why don't you go ahead and talk about your mom and how you found out that she had COVID?
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. So, like I stated, unfortunately, my mom and I kind of always had a rocky relationship. I love my mother dearly, but I just learned and figured out that it was just kind of best for me to just love her from afar. Our relationship was not the healthiest at times. And so, prior to all of this happening, 5 years ago, I decided that it was just best that I loved her from afar. I prayed for her. I loved my mother. We just had a falling out that unfortunately made us stay away from each other. It was not the worst thing in the world, but it was just best for both of us. I did grow up with my mother. My mother did raise me, and she was a great mother. She was a hardworking woman. She was very tough. But she didn't get to spend a lot of time with us because she worked so hard. And she was just more of a tough lover, like towards her children. She was just really like hard on us. And, she had tough love, but nonetheless, we were taken care of. Um, so 5 years ago was the last time I actually had spoken to my mother. And prior to that, we were working on our relationship, and we were actually getting along really well. It was a really great time for us. She would come stay the weekend at my house. My kids would go stay at her house. We would do shopping trips together. We would go eat. I would spoil her with her favorite foods. And my mom always had medical conditions. She actually had heart surgery. She actually had a pacemaker. She was diabetic, and she had many other medical issues. And yeah, so after our fallout, like I said, I would keep in touch. Like I would know about my mother through my younger sister because my younger sister was actually always in touch with my mom and they had a great relationship. So I would check on mom all the time, hey, how's mom doing? She's good, she's strong, she's home. My mom was also not working anymore because of her medical condition. She was actually on disability for life. Um, so my mom would get bored. My mom was always a busy woman. She loved working. And when she had to stop working, it was tough for her. She would like to still kind of do things and be out there and have fun, travel. And I know she was doing that in those 5 years. I know she was happy doing that. The people that lived with her were her ex-husband and my little brother. She had a financial understanding with her ex-husband, and so they divorced, but they decided to just continue to live each other, just live together, sorry, to help each other out financially. So that was her life. Again, I would check on her through my sister, and she was doing good. When COVID hit, I automatically thought about my mom because I knew that she did not like to really sit home. I knew she liked to travel. She loved going to Mexico every year. And I did think about, how is she going to do it? You know, how is she going to get through this? Because she's a person that likes to be free and do what she wants and be out there. I automatically called my sister and asked her, hey, how's mom doing? Like, does she understand what's going on? Like, does she understand that this can impact her if she gets it? And my little sister informed me that my mother, right off the bat, was like, oh, like, I can't get COVID because if I get COVID, I'm done. Like, I'm not going to make it. And I was like, wow, okay. Again, this is the strongest woman I've ever met. And this is someone that has gone through so many medical issues and always pulled through.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's this short little 5 foot lady, but she was small, but she had such a, huge warrior, attitude and just who she was. And so, you know, when my sister told me that my mom was aware of what was going on, and when she said that, in my mind, I said, okay, she obviously knows that it's scary. It's something that is not something that can be messed with. And my sister told me that my mom was staying home, and she told me that she was not going out. She was being very careful. The concern was that her ex-husband was working, and so obviously he was coming in and out of the house. And then my younger brother was also in and out of the house because he was doing his own activities. So he would be in and out of the home. So I would ask my sister, how is my mom doing it with that? Like, how are they like living together and them being in and out and being that mom has medical issues? And my sister would tell me that my mom would say that she would kind of just stay in her room and they would kind of like take turns going out to the kitchen for whatever was needed. My mom did have her own restroom, so that was good. So my sister would tell me that as the months went, March, April, May, June, I would of course check on my mom, and My sister would tell me that mom was getting bored. She wasn't liking this. She would want to go to the market. I remember there was a time, I don't know about you, but like I remember like I wouldn't even go to the market. I would order Instacart and then just have the food delivered and clean. I would clean everything because again, we didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
So I think my sister said she even told mom, like, don't go to the market. Like, I'll order food for you. But my mom was like, no, I have to go to the market. Like, I have to get out there and go to the market for myself and feed myself. And like, I can't depend on anybody. And that was typical of my mom. So my sister would say that my mom would wear her mask. She would be very careful. She would go to the store and grab things that she needed. And she was good. She was good. She was doing her her usual doctor's appointments, her cardiac appointments, everything. She was good. She was on target, and she was doing well. So I would check on her. The only thing that my sister would keep telling me was that my mom was bored, but she was hanging in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was hanging in there, and she was bored, and she was sad because she couldn't see my sister. My mom would go frequent to visit my sister in Montebello. My mom lived in Corona. And so my mom would drive to Montebello to see my sister and stay there. And she was sad because she was not able to do that anymore. And obviously my sister would tell her, no, you can't come over, like stay away. Because my sister would say that my mom would really want to go see her, but my sister would say, no, stay away, stay at your house. Like we need to all be careful. So those months go by. December hits, and it's December, it's Christmas time. We're getting ready, for the holidays. It was actually my boyfriend or my husband and I had actually bought our home in October of 2020. So it was a pretty wonderful time for us because we were going to celebrate our first Christmas in our new home in December of 2020. So we're relaxing on December 9th, watching TV, and I get a phone call around 8:30 at night, and I automatically saw the phone number and the name and knew there was something wrong. It was my mom's ex-husband, and it was his name and his phone number. So my heart literally just dropped to the ground because at that point I knew that he was calling me because something was up with my mom, because there was no other reason for him to call me, as he and I did not have a relationship. We never talked, we never chatted on the phone. So obviously something was wrong. I remember the feeling of fear, and I remember my heart just being on the floor. And I remember when I answered, I didn't even say hi. I just said, what is wrong with my mom? Because I knew it. I knew something was wrong. And he basically just told me right off the bat that my mom was not good. And I said, what do you mean not good? What does that mean? And he said, your mom has probably less than 24 hours to live. And I said, excuse me? It just was like, what? It just pretty much slammed me to the ground. And I said, I said, what does that mean? What do you mean she has only 24 hours? What's wrong with my mother? And at that point, he informed me that my mother was at the hospital and that my mother had COVID.
Mm.
So I asked him what hospital she was at, and he told me, and I remember I hung up on him. And I called Corona Regional Hospital, which is where my mother was. And I remember the fear calling. I was shaking, I was crying, not knowing what to expect, but also preparing myself for the worst. And I was directly transferred to the COVID unit. And I was transferred to my mother's actual nurse. It was at night, so they transferred me to the night shift nurse that was attending to my mother. And I introduced myself, informed the nurse who I was and why I was calling. And I remember the nurse told me he did not know that my mother had other kids besides my brother. And he informed me that my mother was not doing well. And he informed me that my mother had actually been hospitalized prior to December 9th, prior to the night of the call. for 2 weeks.
Oh,
So that just slammed me on the floor double time. Apparently my mom had been in the hospital fighting for her life due to COVID for 2 weeks. So what I was told that night was that my mother went into the hospital in November. I want to say it was a week of Thanksgiving. And she went in because she was having chest pains and difficulty breathing. And so, from what I've learned after, is that she was admitted because of the chest pain and because of her difficulty breathing. So, the week that she was admitted, which again, I think it was November or Thanksgiving week, she and I'm getting this from the notes because I did have my mother's notes, medical records and notes from the hospital sent over to me after she passed because I wanted to read and understand exactly, day by day what happened and what was done and what was going on. So what I learned was that she was admitted that week of Thanksgiving, and when she was admitted, she was still able to talk. She filled out all her paperwork on her own. She went in with her purse and her cell phone. And I remember reading on one of the notes that they were like doing breathing treatments on her and they would tell her to lay prone. And I remember, on one of the notes stated that the patient was giving them a hard time about laying prone. I know my mom did not like laying that way. And it didn't surprise me because that's my mom. She did what she wanted. But I knew she was able to communicate that first week, and I knew that, she was able to advocate for herself and her health. It looked like the following week was the week that she really started declining. And the thing is that since her ex-husband is the one that took her to the hospital, he is the one that like signed her paperwork. He was an emergency contact, and like I said, they did not know that she had other children. And he was the main contact for everything that was going on since she was admitted. So because of this, we had no idea that she was at the hospital. And unfortunately, he did not inform us. Neither did my younger brother. What I was told was that my mom, she didn't want us to know. She was a feisty one. She didn't like calling anybody and worrying anybody. And I can understand it was I do believe it was something she said because that's how she was, and I can understand it, I guess. But I'm angry, and I feel like at that point it was getting worse and it was COVID. That was the time that we needed to be told and informed that our mother was at the hospital.
yeah. So, can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
If he was her ex-husband, I did she give permission for him to be the one to make the choices, or did he did your brother make choices?
That was a question I had from the beginning of all of this. And from what I understand, from what the hospital informed me, was that, he took her, he signed her forms when she got there. He said he was her husband. And then he informed them that there was a younger brother involved as well. So that if he was not able to be contacted, that they can call the home and my younger brother would be there to, answer any questions or give any directions. The thing also that, again, now I do understand, and I guess I look at the big picture. This happened when it started really getting crazy out there. If you recall in December, you started hearing about the hospitals like starting to like run out of room, starting that you started hearing about, the morgues being super full. So what I was told when I did go to the hospital, because I did go to the hospital the day after my mother passed, I got the call to go and pick up her belongings. What I was told when I went is that they apologized to me and they did say it was such a crazy time for us that we didn't like verify if that was her legal husband or not. He brought her, she knew him. We saw her talk to him on the phone when she was admitted. So we didn't double check. We didn't really say, hey, like, let's make sure it's not her ex-husband per se, hey, he said he was her husband, and that's what we knew.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I did want to be angry at them.
Mhm.
I really did. I wanted to say, hey, like, why did you guys like talk to him? Like, that's not her husband. But they didn't know, but that's definitely something that I asked in the beginning. So my mom, in that first week, and then the second week, she started declining. And the decision was made to put my mom on a vent. I don't know what my mom's wishes were. I don't know what her last words were. From reading the notes, like the last time she talked and was able to communicate was, I want to say, a few days after Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
What happened was that her organs started failing and her breathing was getting more complicated. So the decision was made to put her on the vent. So my brother and her ex-husband made that decision. So the second week of her hospital admission, she was placed on a vent because it was getting worse.
Mm.
I had no clue. I pretty much was celebrating Thanksgiving in my new home without an idea that my mother was losing her battle to COVID.
Yeah.
So going back to the night of the call, December 9th, my mother has already been at the hospital for a few weeks. The second week being on the vent, being placed on the vent. So the night I got the call, the reason why I got the call is because it looks like earlier on that day, my mom started having very bad complications. I was told that she they started doing dialysis, attempting dialysis because she was getting rapid kidney failure. And I was told that her body was rejecting the dialysis. And I was told that the reason why they said that she probably didn't have a long time to live was because her body started bleeding internally, and there was times that there was blood coming out of the vent, and they had to suction. So that is what happened on the 9th. She started bleeding and coming out of the vent, and my mom's ex-husband was called and was told that she probably would not make it past the night on the 9th. And that is why he called. So when I talked to the nurse informed me that it didn't look good. They told me kind of what had happened, kind of gave me a recap of the 2 weeks. They apologized for not, knowing that I was around, my sister, my other siblings, and not reaching out to us. They did not have an idea that we were there. But when I asked if I can see my mom, um, he was very kind and he set up a Zoom camera in my mother's room. And at that point, I called my sister and I told her what happened. And she told me that that explains why she had not answered her call for 2 weeks. She said that she continued calling my mom and texting her for 2 weeks and got no answer. I asked her why she didn't like go to her house, and she said that was the next step. She said that she did talk to my mom when she got to the hospital, I guess, and my mom told her, I'm okay. I'm just having some chest pains. So my sister said, okay, keep in touch, mom. And she said, I will, but she's like, kind of just want to be left alone. So again, it was not something that was not common for my mom. But when I told my sister was just really, really shocked. And my sister and I were able to be with our mom via Zoom because of the nurse. He left the tablet in there so that we could have some time with our mom. And we got to see her. I got to see my mom for the first time in 5 years. Not the way I wanted to see her. She was fully vented. It looked like she was sleeping, but you just see her body just being pumped. We just cried. We cried. And, I didn't know what to expect the next day. I didn't think about it. I just kind of thought about where I was in the moment. And I prayed. My sister prayed. And we talked to our mom. I told my mom I loved her very much and I was sorry for not being around for 5 years. I told her I was sorry for not being there for those 2 weeks. I was shocked. I honestly was going through so many emotions because it just, one minute I'm happy in my new home with my family, and the next minute I'm watching my mother on a Zoom call losing her life. It's if COVID hit my home, it's like it hit us.
Yeah.
I remember we were on the Zoom call, I want to say for an hour. They were kind enough to give us time with her. And I remember the nurse came back on and told us he had to disconnect because there was another patient, another family that needed the tablet. He did tell me that he would keep in contact with me through the night if there was anything. Um, I did inform him that I was now the contact for my mother. And he did inform me that first thing in the morning when my mother's doctor got there in the morning, I would be the one called in regards to my mother's care and what were the next steps, what was going on with my mom. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare that night. I didn't sleep. My sister and I cried. I called my other siblings. I called my mom's sister. I called my dad. My dad was the first person I actually called. I called my dad crying and told my dad what was happening, and my dad was crying, and he was the first person that, I told, and the first person that gave me all the support I needed as always. And he just said, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Like my heart's breaking for you guys. What can I do?" Yeah, we didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep. I was just waiting for the phone to ring in the morning, and sure enough, the phone rang bright and early on December 10th. And it was my mom's doctor, and he introduced himself. He had informed me that he was a provider that had been taking care of my mother since she was admitted. He kind of gave me a recap and a rundown of everything that had taken place. Um, Again, apologized for not talking to me sooner. But he pretty much told me, there's nothing that we can do. Your mom is suffering. He basically told me that way. And he told me, I don't know your mother as well as you do. He's like, I don't know what her last wishes are, what she wanted. He says there's nothing else that we can do that we haven't already done. She came in very sick. She's already a sick person. And he told me like straight up, she had no chance. And I knew my mom knew this. And I just feel so bad because although I know she was the strongest person, I don't know. Like, I don't know if she was scared. I don't know what she was feeling. And it breaks my heart. And he told me, like, she had no chance. And he told me that pretty much what I was looking at was just keeping her on the vent, but that there was going to be no progress. And he informed me that she started bleeding again. And it was just the internal bleeding was so bad that again in the early hours of the 10th it started coming out of her vent, and it again had to be like pumped up and suctioned. When he asked me if I wanted to disconnect her vent, he said that that was the next step, that he can provide comfort measures for her. But he said that it was up to us to talk it over. He said, "I don't know her, but she's suffering. Her body's declining and it's getting bad." He says, her all her organs are just deteriorating. And he told me he would give me some time, but to call back and let them know what I decided, what my sister decided, what we talked about, and we can go forward. When I asked him if I could see her, he said yes. And they transferred us to the nurse. And the nurse was kind enough to take the call and do the call right there and then. And I wanted to see her. I don't know, I guess I wanted to see her. I didn't want to give up, but I wanted to see her. And from the night prior to that morning, it was so horrible how her body just changed. When I saw her on the 9th, she looked like she was sleeping. She was pink. It looked like my mom was sleeping. And when I saw her on the 10th, she was so swollen, so purple. Her body from the night before to that morning had just changed. Like there was just so much change and it wasn't good. I felt so bad. She didn't look like she was just sleeping anymore. Like I can tell like it was not good. The way her skin color changed, the way her body was just so swollen. I knew that we had to disconnect her. So we got to say goodbye by ourselves. And then I just called back after I spoke to my siblings, and we all decided it was the best thing for our mom to just let her go and let her rest. So I called the doctor and I told the doctor that the decision was to just put her on comfort measures and disconnect the vent. And the doctor told us that that was the best decision that we could do for her. And they did call us back. I want to say in an hour later, they did call us back and they actually they gave us time. They gave me time to kind of get people like my siblings, my mom's sister together on a Zoom call to say goodbye to her as well. So what they did was they called an hour later and they did do a Zoom and they took the tablet into my mother's room and we saw them disconnect her. We saw them do it. I guess we all got to say goodbye. And after that, the nurse just pretty much told me that he would call me once my mom had passed. And it was the hardest day, just waiting. It's like you're just waiting. You're waiting for the call. I was praying. I was talking to my mom, hoping she would hear me. Telling her I was sorry. Telling her to go at peace. And we waited and waited. And I got a call about 8:30. And the nurse told me my mom had passed. And I'll never forget her voice. She was the sweetest nurse. I started crying and she told me, "Your mom was one tough cookie." She says, "We thought your mom was going to pass right after we disconnected her, but she hung on all day." And I said, "Yeah, my mom was always a tough cookie." And she held on all day and she passed at, yeah, I think it was actually they called me at 8:45. She had passed at 8:30. And the nurse told me that she was there with my mom. She was so sweet. She said she sat there with my mom and my mom, she says, "I want you to know your mom did not pass alone. I sat here with her. I held her hand and I was praying. I was praying with her and she's not alone." And that's something I'll never forget. Till this day, I don't forget her name. She didn't have to do that, but she did. And that just as hard as it is, it just made me feel a little better that my mom was not alone.
Yeah.
She said, okay, she says, I want you to know I prayed and I'm here with her. And she says, I'm going to get your mom cleaned up and I'm going to get her pretty so that she can get picked up. And I'll never forget that. And the first person I called was my sister, and she called my siblings. And then second person I called was my dad. My dad started crying, even though my parents were not together and they've been apart for years. I mean, it's still our mom, and obviously hearing me cry just broke his heart. When my mom passed, I feel like we got we made I feel like we just made it to where it got really crazy, where like the mortuaries were not picking up, the patients. So I literally scrambled to find, my mom didn't have anything organized for herself. She didn't have any pre-planning. So I just scrambled, and we scrambled to find, my mom wanted to be cremated. So we found a crematory service, and they actually picked her up that night. We got, I guess, lucky. They picked her up that night, because I heard after from many people that didn't happen for them. So yeah, so my mom passed on December 10th, and she got picked up that night from the hospital, and we prepared everything. It was just a crematory that we did, and then we were able to pick up our mother on Christmas Eve. So on December 24th, we were able to pick her up.
Yeah.
So my mom passed on the 10th, and trying to understand what happened. And we're going through the emotions, and we're going through the grief, obviously, of losing her. Where like my dad's birthday was on December 20th, but my dad, he's at home. My dad actually had knee surgery in October, because when we moved to our home, my dad was helping us move. My dad had a fall during that move, and the fall was so bad that my dad ruptured his kneecap.
Oh.
Yeah. So my dad was at home from October on, recovering from his knee surgery. So after my mom passed, I kind of was just like, I can't even do Christmas. Like, if anything, like, we'll just have daddy come over, even though he's not feeling well, but because of his kneecap, if he feels okay, we'll bring him over. If not, then it is what it is. Like, we can't. And the holidays were just kind of shot already, because obviously, we lost my mom. So because my dad ruptured his kneecap in October and had surgery in November, he was recovering at home. My dad lived with my grandma, his mother, and his sister, which is my aunt. Just them three. They lived in, my grandma and my auntie and my dad lived in Whittier, California, which is only about 30 minutes away from me. And when my mom passed, my dad was the first one to say, don't worry about Christmas, don't worry about my birthday, I'm here for you guys. Just typical of my dad. I felt so bad that at home recovering from knee surgery, because I felt sometimes like it was my fault because he was helping me move. But he made sure to let me know that it was not, my fault. And he said, it's just accidents happen. I fell and I it's an accident. I'm recovering, and I'll be better, and I'll be better than ever once I'm better.
Yeah.
So after my mom passed and we started making the arrangements for her cremation, like I said, my dad said, don't worry about Christmas, my birthday. You just take care of you, and your sister, you guys have to stick together and just take care of you. That's what we did. That's what we were doing. And then I want to say around December 17th, my dad started feeling sick. And I I would call him every day. Again, I was very close to him. I would check on him. How's your knee? How's your knee? Do you need anything? No, I'm good. Your aunt's helping me. Your aunt's coming and she's pretty much being my caregiver, which is what my aunt did for a living. She was a caregiver at night. And so she would come home in the early morning from taking care of her patient all night and bring my dad food, check on my dad, help him with his wound. She would help clean it. Um, my sister and I weren't able to do that every day, obviously, because we work and we have little kids and children, and we weren't able to be there every day to do that. But my aunt was able to because they lived together.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad told me he wasn't feeling well. And I said, "What's wrong?" And he says, I have a fever." So I said, "Okay, all right, we'll take some Tylenol." So then, I automatically call my sister and say, "Hey, have you talked to dad? He says he's not feeling well." And she's like, "Yeah, I talked to him. He says he has a fever. Let's keep an eye on him." So as the days goes by, we're checking on him, and now the fever turns into a cough, and now the cough turns into trouble breathing. And my dad has never medically been diagnosed with asthma, but my dad always seemed to have asthma. But my dad was always the type of man that did not like to go to the doctor, which would upset us. But that's my dad, and that's who he was. And as much as we tried to force him to go to the doctor, he wouldn't. And he actually would get inhalers of albuterol. And I would ask him, "Well, if you don't go to the doctor, where are you getting those? Because you're not medically diagnosed with asthma." And he says, "Well, I have asthma. I know I do." And my dad used to work at a hospital, so he had friends that still work there, and they would help him out with those inhalers. So he would use his inhaler quite often. And I noticed that when my dad got his or stopped working and retired, he started gaining more weight because he wasn't, busy anymore. And I noticed because of that, his breathing I would notice sometimes when he would laugh, he would kind of lose, like, have a shortness of breath. I noticed when we would walk somewhere, I would notice that his shortness of breath would happen. And I would tell him too, maybe it was because of his weight gain, maybe because he wasn't eating the healthiest, but he kind of just laughed it off like, "I'm fine." So when my dad started getting sick and having these issues, automatically me and my sister freaked out and we're like, "Oh no, 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 like, no, like, dad can't have COVID. Like, no, this is not no, this can't happen to us." And we automatically thought of his asthma, of his breathing, concerns. And so we asked my auntie, who was the one that was living with him and his caretaker, if she was sick. And she informed us that she had been sick for a couple of weeks now.
Oh.
Yeah. And we asked her if she had gotten tested, and she said no. She said, "I don't have COVID. I don't need to get tested."
Mm.
I'll never forget. I was really angry. I'm very close to my auntie. I was very angry. My sister was super angry at her too. And we like pretty much begged her to go get tested. And we pretty much begged her to stay away from my dad at that point.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably too late because obviously she had already been around my dad, but we didn't know she was sick. So when she told us, we were like, "Oh my gosh." So when she told us that she was sick, I automatically called my dad and I told my dad, "Dad, she's been sick for a couple of weeks." And he said, "I know." And I said, "Dad, well, I mean, why, like, why are you guys around each other?" He's like, she's coming in here to bring me food. She's coming in here to help me, go to the restroom."
Yeah.
And, she keeps telling me that it's just a small cough and just maybe her allergies. So at this point, I convinced my other auntie to call her sister, which is my aunt, and to tell her to go take a test. So she does. She finally goes, takes a test. She lets us know she's positive for COVID. So again, we're waiting for my mom's ashes. And now we're told that my aunt has COVID.
Yeah.
We knew that my dad had it. fevers, his shortness of breath, and his cough was COVID. We didn't even need to test him. We knew it. So when my aunt tells us that she's COVID positive, at this point, my dad's already like really high fevers of 104. I'll never forget. I called him on the 20th, which was his 63rd birthday. And I said, Daddy, how are you feeling? And I remember that he's like, I can't talk because it hurts. Because I can't catch my breath. I knew it was getting worse. And I felt so helpless. I couldn't do anything for him. At this point, my aunt was in her room locked up because she was really sick. I was so angry. I didn't reach out to her. My sister was so angry. She didn't reach out to her. But we knew she was really going through it. And then I was concerned about my grandma because my grandma was there, and my grandma's, she's in her 80s. But what do you know? My grandma was doing just fine. She was doing just fine, and she was concerned for my dad. She said she would hear my dad coughing a lot, and she said she didn't care. She would go to his room to check on him, and I would tell her not to because I didn't want her to get sick, but she didn't care. She says, that's my son, and I'm going to check on him.
Yeah.
So I'm here at home with the loss of my mom, preparing myself to pick up her ashes and feeling helpless that I can't help my dad. And here he is. Get up and walk. He's recovering from knee surgery. So not only does he have COVID, but he's recovering from his knee surgery. And when I called him on his birthday to wish him a happy birthday, he said he couldn't talk. It hurt too much and he couldn't breathe. I was so worried. I cried all night. I called him the next day and his voice sounded worse. My auntie, his other sister, felt so helpless too, and we were trying to figure out what we could do as a family, but there was nothing we could do. We couldn't go. I told my dad, I'm going over there. I'm going to get a hazmat suit. And he said, no, if you come, I'm not opening the door.
Mm-hmm.
And my auntie sent him a pulse ox. She's like, let me send him a pulse ox so he can use it and check his O2 levels. So we sent it to him. She sent it via Amazon. And I told him, Daddy, I need you to use this and tell me what numbers come up because I'm familiar with it. He didn't do it. He's like, I can't. I don't want to. I can't. Like I don't have any energy to do anything. I remember my grandma called me and she was crying and she was saying that my dad had a fever of like 105 one night.
Wow, that's so high.
So high. And I was just, you can imagine how scared and nervous I was. And I remember calling him and saying, Dad, I'm calling the ambulance. That's a really high fever. And I remember him just telling me not to call, that he's going to fight this. And he's like, I have COVID. I know I have it. This is the worst I've ever had, felt in my life, but I'm going to get through this. I'm going to fight it out at home. I don't want to go to a hospital. He would tell us, don't worry about me. You guys have to worry and deal, about your mom and get through that. Don't worry about me. I'm going to fight this. And my dad was always such a strong man. I mean, my dad was 6'1". I always saw him as this huge, tall, giant hero, just the strongest man. Nothing can touch him. And I'm like, my dad's gonna get through this. My dad, my dad has nothing wrong with him. He'll get through this. So I didn't call the ambulance. I regret it so much sometimes, but I didn't do it because he told me not to. And he really said, please, I want to be home. And I know, he had been watching the news. I knew that he was seeing, because at this time, this is when it really started getting bad. Right after my mom passed was when it really started getting bad, where, you heard about the hospitals being so fully capacitated, capacitation, and people being seen in the parking lots. I know that he didn't want to go to the hospital for that reason. But yeah, he told me that he had a fever of 104. He had a fever of 105. He said he started having nightmares. He couldn't eat. He couldn't breathe well. I remember Eve, the 20, no, I'm sorry, the 23rd. I talked to him on the 23rd. I was scheduled to pick up my mother's ashes on the 24th, Christmas Eve, in Corona. And so on the 23rd, I called my dad in the evening and I said, Dad, I'm picking up my mom's ashes tomorrow, Christmas Eve. When I come back with her, I'm going to go to your house and I'm going to take you whatever you need and leave it at the doorstep. And I remember he said, bring me orange juice. I remember that my friend who works in the medical office said, I can get him a Z-Pack. So I just said, that's fine. And so I told my dad, I'm taking you a Z-Pack with your orange juice. And he said, okay. And he said he couldn't talk. He's like, I can't talk. I love you. And I said, I love you too, Dad. And my dad always said, I love you more. So like when we would always say, I love you, he would say, I love you more. So like that night, he said, I love you more. I'll see you tomorrow. And he said, be strong tomorrow. I know that it hurts. I'm so sorry. I'm with you. I love you more. I said, okay, Daddy. So I got up Christmas Eve, hardest drive to go, to the crematory, to the mortuary, I should say, to pick up my mother. I picked up my mother with my oldest sister. And as we were driving back to my house, I get a call from my uncle, who is my dad's brother. And he informs me that my auntie and my grandma had to call the ambulance to pick up my dad because my dad was really bad. So my uncle told me, hey, the ambulance just picked up your dad. He told me that he actually drove to my grandma's house, which is when he got there, the ambulance is already taking off with my dad. So my uncle followed the ambulance to the hospital in Whittier. And my uncle told me that he was able to see them take my dad out of the ambulance. And he said that he called my dad's name and he waved and that my dad put his thumb up. And he's like, he looked good and he put his thumb up. So I said, okay, my dad's going to be okay. Yeah. But I was a mess because I was scared. I didn't know what was going to happen. I just lost my mom. And now I feel like I'm going through this nightmare again.
Yeah.
I called my dad right away the minute he got to the hospital. And it was funny because I don't know how, but I got a hold of him in the ER. And he says, I'm just getting here and they're just admitting me and you're already calling me and you already found me. But that's how close I was to him. And like, he always, like, we had a joke. He always told me that I was worse than a wife. And he always told me, like, I can't do anything, like, because you're always knowing you're just worse than a wife. Like, I don't need to be married ever because I have you. So I remember crying and telling him, Daddy, I picked up my mom, and Daddy, like, you're in the ER, like, what's going on? What's happening? And he's like, being my dad, his sense of humor was just so funny and so wild. He just told me, like, I feel like shit. And he says, and I can't take this anymore. So I finally gave in and came here. Yeah. The worst place ever. And I says, well, Dad, they're going to take care of you there. Like, you're in the best place. I'm glad you're there. I'm glad you're finally there. And I'm glad that, you're getting some attention at the hospital now. He says, I had the worst fever last night. And yeah, he's like, I'm not doing well. So I said, okay, Dad, like, as soon as you get into your room, please call me and let me know, what room you're in. And that way I can, be in contact with your nurses and your doctors. And he said, okay. My dad actually filled out all his own paperwork. I learned after that he was able to fill out his own paperwork. My dad put me down as his emergency contact and I was the contact for everything, which I already knew. My dad always told me that, I was always going to be in charge of everything for him. And I learned after that, when my dad went to his room, like, even though he was sick and struggling, he was just happy still. And like the nurses told me, oh, you know, your dad was just so nice, so kind. He was so sick, but he was like, just like, oh, anything, please call my daughter. You know, he was just so grateful that we were there to take care of him and help him. So my dad was placed on a cannula.
Mm-hmm.
His doctor called me right away and let me know that he had been placed on all the COVID medications that there were. I think it was remdesivir, I believe.
Yeah, remdesivir.
Remdesivir, yes. He was placed on that. And then there's a couple of other medications that they placed him on that were, I guess, the COVID medications. He was placed on antibiotics. So I felt good. I felt good. I said, you know, Dad's going to be good. I was worried because his oxygen levels were really low when he went in. They were actually at 76.
Oh, wow.
Yes, which is horrible, horribly low. I was very worried about that, but I thought, okay, he's at the hospital now. He's on everything he needs to be on. Those O2 levels are going to come up, and he's going to be okay. So the doctor did tell me, you know, he did come in at very low levels, but he is alert. He's talking, he's joking. He's talked about you already. He's already talked about his kids, how much he loves his children and his grandchildren. He's okay. He says, we're going to just keep an eye on him. And I said, okay. So I felt very hopeful. I was letting all my family know, my sister, I was giving them all the updates. So I felt very hopeful. I called my dad that day. I said, I'm glad you finally gave in. I'm glad you're here. And he says, you know, I don't feel good. Like, I need a rest. Let me rest. I said, okay, Daddy, I'll let you rest. The next day I called, Daddy, are you okay? I'm not feeling well. You know, I'm frustrated. The breathing, it hurts. It's frustrating. You know, I can't breathe that well. I'm like, okay. And he's like, you really need to let me sleep. And he's like, don't make me talk right now. And I said, okay, Daddy, I love you. And he says, okay, I love you more. I kept calling. I would call at night. I would call the nurses. I would get updates. The O2 levels did go up. They went up to 80, but then they would drop. Then they would go up to 80, 85. Then they would drop. The doctor then told me that he needed to get off the cannula and he needed to be on a BiPAP.
Yeah.
So my dad was placed on a BiPAP. At this time, I'm still in contact with him, but the contact is becoming less and less. We did a Zoom. When I saw my dad on the Zoom, I was shocked because he was so skinny. The last time I saw my dad alive was in November because I went to see him. And this was actually when my mom was hospitalized, but I did not know. I actually saw my dad a day after Thanksgiving because I went and took him food. That was the last time I hugged him and kissed him and saw him in person. And he was already thin because he had already lost some weight from his knee surgery since he wasn't able to kind of be on his own and eat what he wanted. But when I saw him on the Zoom in December, he had lost so much weight from the November visit. I saw him on the BiPAP. He wasn't all there. He was kind of like, his eyes were kind of shut. He kind of couldn't talk. I was just like, Daddy, like, please get better. You too. And he would kind of try to talk, but it was hard. And I got really scared. Me and my sister were like, this isn't good. This is scary. This is not good. And after that, like that day, like the next day, the doctor started telling me that my dad's oxygen levels were really dropping again. I want to say this is the week of like, yeah, so the following week. So Christmas passed, yeah. I want to say a few days after Christmas, he got really bad. That's when he started declining and getting worse. I know on New Year's Eve, he was really bad on New Year's Eve. The hospital called me and told me that they had to restrain him because he was pulling off his BiPAP.
Oh.
They called to tell me that he had to get restrained because he was pulling it off, and as soon as he would pull it off, his O2 levels just went so low, and they told me that his heart rate just would skyrocket.
Yeah.
Dad actually even called me. I remember he called me. I want to say it was maybe New Year's night after New Year's Eve. He called, and I was so scared because you see the phone call from the hospital at 2 a.m. Obviously, you think the worst. And I remember I answered and I said hello, and he says it's me. And he's like, where am I? Where am I? And I said, Daddy, you know where you're at? You're at the hospital. And he says, I'm hungry. I'm cold. And I just knew that it wasn't good. I told him I would call his nurse to get him food. And he tells me, no, don't bother them. They're working so hard. I said, no, you're cold and you're hungry. I'm going to call them. And I felt good because I knew he obviously knew how to dial my numbers. I'm like, okay, maybe he's okay, but maybe he's just, very heavily medicated.
Yeah.
Because I knew they had to actually medicate him because he was taking off his BiPAP. They had to give him, I think it's called Advent, and that was to kind of relax him to the point where he wouldn't take off his mask.
Yeah.
So I kind of felt like maybe he's just, in a little daze because of that. So I felt a little better. But the next day, I called his phone in his room all day and he didn't answer. And when I talked to the nurse, finally, they said he can't answer his phone anymore. And I said, why? And they said, he can't anymore. He's declining. It's crazy. It's like, I went to talking to him and him telling me he loves me and him telling me that he's going to be okay. And a few days later, I just get told like he's declining. It just happened so fast. It was like from one day to another, the COVID just really attacked him. I was told that when he did go in, he had pneumonia and it was both lungs. So I was told that the pneumonia had completely filled his lungs. I think that's what the antibiotics were for the pneumonia. Yeah. But they did tell me that the COVID pneumonia was everywhere on his lungs. And they did ask me, did he have asthma? Does he have asthma? And I said, well, he's never been medically diagnosed, but he diagnosed himself with asthma. And they said, no, he does have asthma. And they told me he came in with a little inhaler. I'm like, yeah, that's his buddy, that inhaler. That's what he always would use. So when the doctor called me to tell me our updates, the doctor did call me with the social worker, and the social worker brought up hospice to me. And I said, no, I don't need hospice. He doesn't need hospice. He's going to be fine. Why are you bringing this up to me? And she said that she told me that she had met my father the day he went in. And she told me, what a great person. She says he was joking. He talked about you. He talked about his family. He talked about not wanting to be here, but just finally giving in to what he needed to do. And because his daughters were bugging him to go to the hospital, and because his daughters had just lost their mother, he didn't want them to go through that again. So he went to make sure he would be okay for us. She knew everything. The social worker said that my dad and her had a great conversation. She knew so much. And she says, I have to tell you, from that day until today, I'm not seeing the same person. She's like, I can't believe he's your dad that I met on day one. It just broke my heart. It tore me apart. Yeah. I want to say that the hospice call was on Monday. My dad passed on a Friday, so this was the Monday prior to his passing, where they told me that probably should be something I should think about. And I just said, no, that's not an option right now. I remember the doctor telling me on Monday that if he continued pulling off the BiPAP, it was going to get worse because his O2 levels are going down when he does that, and his heart rate. So I remember on Tuesday, I asked for a Zoom call, and the social worker connected us to my dad, but my dad couldn't really talk at all. You could just hear the machine, the BiPAP. It was so loud, and it was so sad because I saw the social worker in her hazmat gear. It was just my dad was surrounded by plastic walls, with bags. It was just so ugly. Just so he was alone. And I remember when he would hear me and my sister talk, he would move around, but he couldn't talk. I put my baby there to see him, and I told him, Daddy, look, Axel's here, Axel's here. And he would just move and moan, but he couldn't talk. I remember how skinny he looked. And the social worker said, she was telling my dad, your daughters are on the line, your daughters. And he would just move around. And I remember I told him, Dad, stop pulling your mask off. I'm going to be mad at you if you continue doing that. You need to stop doing that. And then he would just move around when I would tell him that. So that week when I would call again every day, wait. And at this point, my dad was not able to talk at all anymore. And the doctors were just telling me that it was just my dad. What was happening is that the oxygen was at the highest that they could give him. They could not give him higher oxygen because at that point it was not, they couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So what the doctor was telling me is like, we've already upped and the oxygen to the highest level possible that we can, and we can't go higher. And it's still not helping him. His oxygen levels are still low. So I remember on Friday, I had my usual update with the doctor, and the doctor told me if tonight doesn't change, if he doesn't progress, or if he doesn't get better tonight, then the next step is a ventilator. That's something that you need to think about. And I remember I was just so heartbroken, because I know that my dad did not want to be on a vent. That's something we always talked about. My dad actually prepared all his services. My dad pre-planned his services and his cremation. And one of his wishes was never to be ventilated. But I knew in my heart as his daughter, the desperation and frustration that I probably would have vented him, because that's what I wanted. I wanted to give my dad another chance to live. But I knew in my heart he didn't want to be vented. So when the doctor told me that on Friday morning, I was just so heartbroken, and I just cried and cried because I didn't know what to do. I prayed. I talked to my sister. I talked to my uncle, my aunt, and we all were like, he has to get ventilated if that's the next step. But I knew my dad didn't want that. Mm-hmm. So I set up a Zoom that day with the social worker, and we had our Zoom with my dad, I want to say around 3:00. And he did not look good. He was tired. He was so tired. He was so tired. I added my aunt and my uncle to the call, his brother and his sister. I wasn't able to add my other aunt because she was still going through her COVID and she was really sick. I didn't add my grandma because I didn't want my grandma to see my dad like that. I didn't want her to, because she was fine. She was still fine. Nothing was wrong with her. So I didn't want her to get sick. So I added my uncle, my aunt, my sister, me, and my kids, my sister's kids. And we talked, we got to see my dad, and he couldn't really talk, but we were talking to him. But I knew in my heart he didn't look good. And he would move every time we would talk, and the social worker would tell him not to move, it wasn't good for him. And I'll never forget, like right before we hung up, I told him I love you, Dad, so much. I'll never forget. We saw him get every oxygen, every amount of air that he could fight for. Just get it. He got it. Like he grabbed that air that he got. And believe it or not, under that mask, we heard him say, I love you more. And he said it. He said it, and we heard him so clear. And that was the 8th at 3:00. And we hung up. I prayed, I cried, I prayed, I asked my mom to please help us if she could keep him here. I didn't want to lose my best friend, my favorite person, which was my daddy. I still needed him. My kids did, my sister, all of our kids. I prayed so hard that day. And I was laying, ironically, in the same spot that I was when I got the call by my mother. I laid in the same spot that night. At night, I got a call from the hospital, and I knew it in my heart that it wasn't good. And when I answered, I remember answering very low, like just very low, like hello. And I remember the nurse telling me that my dad had a heart attack and that my dad's heart gave up. And I remember it was so horrible. I heard all the frantic noise and all, it was so hectic. I could hear all like the commotion and it was so hectic on the call, and I didn't understand why, but she told me that they were working on my dad. She said that the doctor was working on him at that moment that I was on the phone with her. She said that he had a heart attack and they were trying to resuscitate him. And I remember hearing all the noise. I remember hearing beeps and alarms and noises, and I felt like I heard people running. And I remember screaming and telling her to save him, to save him. I remember screaming so loud to save my daddy. And I remember she said, I could hear her like kind of cry, and she put the doctor on the phone, and the doctor told me, you know, Miss Pedroza, I've already done all I can, and your dad's very weak, and I'm afraid if I keep trying, I'm gonna really hurt him. I started screaming, I don't care, make him be here. And I remember I screamed so loud that I think they just hung up on me. And they told me they would call me back. Just remember sitting there in like a twilight zone, like here I go, like here we go again. Like I just felt like I was in a room like full of darkness.
Yeah.
I just sat there and cried and screamed, and my husband just hugged me, and I didn't know what I was just praying, and I was just asking God not to take my dad. It was so crazy because I literally feel like I know I heard what was happening in that room, that hospital room, and I was 30 minutes away and I couldn't do anything. I want to say they called 15 minutes later to let me know that my dad passed. My dad did not make it. And the next day I went to go to the hospital, and it was the same hospital I took him to when he had his knee fall, like his incident when he fell, and it was the same hospital, the same ER. My husband took me, and I waited outside looking at the hospital thinking, where are you? Where are you, Dad? And my husband comes out with my dad's bag with his belongings, his knee brace, his inhaler, everything. I lost my dad. I lost mom and dad. It's like literally 3 weeks apart. I literally felt like an orphan.
Yeah. And your dad was 63. How old was your mom?
She was 65. And I learned later that my dad, the day he passed, he took off his BiPAP. And I went reading the medical records. I read that they said, you know, what is it, a code blue? And he took it off, and that's what happened. But I feel in a lot of ways like my dad made his peace, and I feel like my dad knew that the next step was the vent, and he knew he didn't want that.
And he knew he didn't want you to make that choice. He didn't want you. Yeah.
Exactly. That's how I feel. That's exactly how I feel. I feel like my dad just said, no, like, I'm not putting my girls through this. It was a nightmare. Like, what after my dad passed, when he passed was the time it was like, yeah, crazy. And long story short, we didn't get my dad to the mortuary until late February. So we didn't even get to have my dad's services until March.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
he was in the hospital for that long?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, because even though he had everything planned. I literally called the next day to inform them, and they told me they couldn't pick him up because their morgue was full. And I called every day after that, every day. When are you gonna pick up my dad? When can you pick up my dad? And they were like so like helpful, understanding, but yet couldn't do it. They were like, "We're sorry, we're so sorry. Like we don't have room."
Yeah.
So that was just another nightmare on top of another nightmare and another. My dad did not get picked up till the end of February. And we didn't get to have his service until March.
Was there a service for your mom?
Yeah, so because of what happened, that my dad got sick, I did have my mom's ashes, and we were going to start planning like a small service for her, but since my dad got sick and then my dad went to the hospital and all of that, we kind of had to put that on hold.
Mhm.
But my sister had my mother's ashes, and we bought a beautiful urn, and so my mom's ashes were in that beautiful urn we bought, but we weren't able to do a service for her because everything happened with my dad, and then my dad passed, and then we did my dad's service. So we had a service for my mom in April because it got hard to nobody wanted to do a service for us because they weren't doing everything. We pretty much already had like my mother's ashes, and since they weren't going to do that part, it was hard for us to like find someone to want to do a service for us. But thankfully we were able to finally find a church that did a beautiful service for our mother in April. So we had my dad's service in March, which he had planned
Mhm.
himself and paid for. He did everything. And I remember when I was in high school, he had told me, "I paid for everything, I planned everything." And I was like, "You're crazy. Why did you do that? Like, don't tell me that." And he told me, "When you grow up, like, and when the day comes that I pass, you're going to thank me for doing this because it's going to take a lot of burden off your shoulders." And my dad was always right. And he was such a wise man. And like, he was my best friend. And he just always wanted to make sure that he took care of us. And he was so right. Like, going through what I went through with my mom and then my dad getting sick, like, honestly, my dad doing all of that for himself really helped us a lot.
Mhm. Yeah, I had planned my mom's with her help too ahead of time. And it did make such a difference to just know who was picking her up, where she was going, what was going to happen, and that they were taking care of it.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And it was scary times because even the mortuary told me, because I would say, "Hey, but my dad paid, like my dad's already had this plan." And they said, "Yes, and that's great, but there's so much death right now. There's so much COVID death right now that we can't fit any more bodies right now."
Yeah.
It was just so ugly, such a scary time. And it was so frustrating because I honestly would have nightmares every night about my daddy being at a hospital morgue. I was just not It was just horrible. It's just something horrible to go through on top of everything else that you're going through. But my dad's service was beautiful, and he always told me that he had picked a beautiful urn. And wow, when I saw it, I cried so much, but it's such a beautiful urn. I was like, wow, like I was just like, wow, dad. But the fact that his wishes were made the way he wanted it, it just, it makes me feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
But it's been really hard, because it's like my mom's my mom's death has been part of my heart, dealing with like not talking to her for some time and not seeing her. And then from one day to another, seeing her and then making decisions. And then the other side of my heart is my dad, like my best friend, my favorite person. Like, the person I thought like was going to be around for so long was just then gone 3 weeks after my mom.
Yeah.
It's just so much, so much. And then you're constantly reminded of like COVID, and just everything that the world does and doesn't do. It's like, wow, it's
Yeah, it's everywhere, and you're always reminded. There's signs, there's commercials, there's
yeah,
billboards. Every time you enter a grocery store or anything, it's just like right in your face. You lost your parents to COVID, and you're reminded of COVID.
correct. Yeah, yes, yes.
So I want to ask, how are you coping? Like the first year, and what Have you done anything to help you grieve and cope with these losses that came so close together?
Yeah, so in the beginning, I honestly kind of just stayed in my room. I mean, truthfully, I just wanted to be in my room and just be crying. It was hard. I mean, it was so hard. My dad was never a sick person, so for like it was just shocking to me, shocking. That my dad, who was never sick, who never was at a hospital, never passed like this, and this COVID is what took my father. And then my mom, it's like my mom went through so much and she was stronger than ever all the time getting through her medical issues, and COVID is what took my mom. I was really angry and I just would stay in my room and cry and cry. And, thank God I have my kids and my husband because they were a big support and getting me through every day. But every day that went on, I feel like I would get more angry and more sad. And the grief was just unbearable. And I feel like I would tell myself I could deal with it on my own. I could deal with it on my own. But as I started realizing I wasn't dealing with it well on my own, I honestly kind of started just wanting to stay away from my kids and my husband and just kind of like wanting to be on my own just because I felt so unhappy, and I realized that I needed to do something to like help me. I actually went to go see a medium, but she is actually a spiritual medium. It was a crazy story how she came into my life, but she reached out to someone that is related to my dad. And she didn't know about us. She didn't know the story, but she reached out and that person gave me her info and I reached out to her and she didn't know who I was. Well, me and my sister prayed about it and we went to go see her, and it was such a beautiful experience. We told ourselves if we weren't comfortable we would leave, but she made us like we prayed together, we talked. She didn't ask us anything about our parents, nothing. She didn't know why we were there. And she basically started telling us that our parents were there to talk to us. And she told us like, your mom says it's okay. Your mom says that you guys made the right decision. And then she said, your dad says, that he sees how sad you guys are and he just wants you to remember all the good times and the good memories. Just everything she told us, she pretty much told us in the verbiage that our parents would talk to us with. It was amazing. It was amazing. She literally described our parents to us and she had no connection to us.
Hmm.
So I have to say, that was one of the things that really helped me get back on my feet. One of the things that she told me was that my mom told her to tell me to start working out and exercising again and running. That's something that I always used to do. And before my parents passed, I had started exercising again. And then when they passed, I stopped completely. And it was just, I was thinking about running again because I'm like, that'll help me with my grief. That will help me feel better about myself, and maybe that will be something that will help me get through this. But I just didn't start it. So after I saw the medium and she told me that my mom said to please start running and start exercising again, I was like, wow, I was just shocked. I will never forget. I got up one morning and I said, Mom, I'm going to go take a walk right now, Mom. And that's what I did. And then the next day I got up and went on another walk and another walk. And then it became running and then it became exercising. And honestly, exercising was really the beginning of my, feeling better. And then I started seeing a therapist because I did need to talk to someone. I did need to sort out my anger, my grief and my sadness. And I couldn't take this out on my family. I started seeing a therapist. That's great. And she helps me get through it. I started getting a lot of signs of my parents, which is another thing that the spiritual medium had mentioned. She said that my grief was not allowing me to really see the signs that my parents were giving me that they were around me. And if I can kind of just, open up, I would start seeing them. And what do you know? Like, I see so many signs about my parents that only I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah, like we used to call my dad Papa Bear because like I said earlier, he was just this big, tall man and he was just always so strong. And like we were little, we always loved hugging him because we would say he gave the best bear hugs. So like when I finally started opening myself to it, I always see bears around me all the time. I kid you not, I see bears everywhere now.
Wow.
Yeah, and that helps me. It helps me a lot. My dad, when we were growing up, also would always tell us that he watches us like a hawk. He would give us, advice, and he would talk to us, and tell us, "Oh, I always watch you guys like a hawk. Remember that." I see a hawk, I want to say, almost every day of my life. Prior to my dad's passing, I never would run into a hawk, and now I see them everywhere.
Yeah.
My mom loved butterflies, and my mom had said that her children were butterflies to her. Every time in my backyard, as I'm working, I have a visual of my backyard. There's a huge monarch butterfly that just flies to my window and just flies in circles. It's just amazing. And it's like, I'm so thankful that I have these signs, and I'm so thankful that I'm accepting them, because it's honestly helping me get through my days.
Yeah. Yeah. I went to see a psychic too.
Wow.
I would never have done anything like that before, but
Yeah.
I just wanted to know that my mom wasn't upset that I wasn't there when she died, and that she died alone. And I didn't tell the lady why I was even there. I just made the appointment, went. And my thing and my mom's thing was always butterflies too.
Oh.
This is going to get me. The psychic said, your mom is in the butterflies, and she didn't know.
Wow.
Yeah. And so I see a little white one outside my window a lot where I live, and I always just say, "Hi, Mom," because that's her checking in on me.
Yes. And then that's what I do. I say, "Hi, Dad. Hi, Mom." And it's like, that makes us feel better. And that's beautiful. And I'm sure maybe other people that don't understand will think we're crazy, but we're not.
Yeah.
Because what you said right now is she's checking in on you. That's exactly the truth. And that's how I feel too. I feel like that. And it's so weird, because sometimes I'm not having the best day, and I might be moody. I might be moody with my husband. And my dad would always tell me to work on that. And when I'm like that, that's when I see a bear. I literally dropped off my son the other day at school, and I was being moody with my husband. And the person that was crossing, the pedestrian that was crossing the street right in front of me, turns, and he had a shirt on with a big bear on it.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, Dad, I'll shape up. I'll drop the moodiness for the day.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, it's just something that we understand. And I'm like you, like, I would have never seen a spiritual medium prior to my parents passing. And my mom always raised us like, you don't go see a medium or a psychic, because that's not what you do. And we just never did it. But I feel like where we're at, like, the desperation and the need to, like, know, is that need. And like you said, like, knowing that they're not mad. I needed that. And like, I didn't bring up anything, but she told me your mom's not mad. And that alone, like, just helps me get through this.
Yeah.
I completely understand. And I've gone to see her a few times, and she's great. Like, she's wonderful. She tells me. And one thing that I'll never forget for everybody, going through this, she told me that because our loved one is no longer on earth, that doesn't mean they're no longer here. What she told me is that you can have the most beautiful relationship with your loved one that's on the other side. And she says, and I'm here to help you with that. But she says, I have learned that you can continue having that beautiful relationship you always had with your dad. And you can start building a beautiful relationship with your mom that you probably didn't have on earth, but you can do that. And that's something that really stuck to me. And that's something that I work on every day. And I tell myself that, like, when I'm sad, to talk to my dad. When I have a funny story, to talk to him. When something happens to my kids, I want to tell my mom. And I do it. I'm doing it. And I'm starting to do it more, because it's helping me. And she's absolutely right. Like, we can continue having that amazing, beautiful relationship with our loved ones, because they are always with us.
Yeah.
And so that's what has helped me cope.
Good. I'm glad, because
thank you.
I mean, it's so much, and it's so heavy, and there's so much emotion there.
Yes. Absolutely.
I want to switch gears a little bit for my last question, and I ask this of everybody who's on the show. I want to know what you say to people who tell you that COVID isn't real.
Wow. I have some people around me that feel that way. That's something that I don't talk to them about. I have found myself in situations where, it's brought up and that comment is made. And honestly, for myself, because I know myself, sometimes I will just get up and walk away because I don't want to start, I don't want to start confrontation. But then there's also times where it's like, you can't be quiet and you can't walk away, and you need to let people hear your voice, more so because like I am the voice for my parents because they're no longer here. Sometimes I want to show them a picture of what I saw of my mother. I want to show a picture of what I saw in my father. And I want to say, really, COVID is not real. Here you go. Look at this picture. Like, it's ridiculous. For people to say like, well, what one thing you always hear is, well, were they sick prior? Did they have underlying condition?
Yeah.
And it's like, it doesn't matter if they did or didn't. My mom had many, many medical issues. Yes, she did. Yes, I can show you all the medical reports and documentation, and I can show you she overcame every one of them. She was living with a pacemaker. But my mother got COVID, and guess what? My mom had no chance. That took my mother. So COVID is real. That is what my mother was diagnosed with. That is why my mother went into the hospital. My dad, my dad was healthy, except for his diagnoses of asthma. But my dad was a healthy person. My dad, even though he didn't go to the hospital, I mean, he would work out. He would eat right. Yes, he did gain some weight and he did kind of stop eating right after he retired, and probably wasn't the healthiest for him, but he was still okay. He was still okay. And this is someone that never ever got sick and went to the hospital. This is someone that didn't need to go to the hospital. And this is someone that was taken by COVID.
Yeah.
And my dad never had any pneumonia until this. And I have the pictures of his lungs. He was filled with COVID pneumonia. And it's like, it's so annoying. It's really annoying when someone says that it is not real. And I say, yes, it is real. And, like I said, I sometimes want to bring out a picture and say, hey, look at this. I want to bring out a medical documentation and say, hey, look at this. Look at my dad's record. Look at my mother's record. Look what they went through. But sometimes that's why I rather just walk away, because I don't want to get into that confrontational stage with someone.
Yeah.
But, it makes you so upset because, like, how dare you say that? How dare you think that? We have lost so many human lives. So many children are orphans now because they lost both parents. So many children don't have caregivers. Like, how dare you say that?
Yeah. And your children aren't going to know their grandpa.
My little baby
Mm-hmm.
hardly had time with his popper. The kids call daddy popper. And
I love that.
He didn't, yeah, it's so cute. And my baby didn't get to know his nana. But I will tell you something, speaking on what we were talking about, the signs and that they are around us.
Mm-hmm.
You are not going to believe, but my 2-year-old toddler, he goes up to my dad's picture and my mom's picture. And this is, I want to say, right after they passed and he started talking. Without him knowing or us telling him, he goes up to my dad and says, hey, Popper. He goes up to Mama and says, hey, Nana. And every day he brings up Popper and Nana. He's always bringing them up.
Wow.
Yeah, so he has a spiritual relationship with them, and I know they are always around my baby. I wear a necklace and it's a heart, and he loves when I open the necklace, because when I open it, it's a picture of his nana and his popper, and he always smiles and he kisses it. But he's not going to know them physically. He's not going to be able to sit on my dad's lap. My mom is not going to be able to cook for him. For someone to say that it is not real, it's just, just horrible. It's just horrible. And there's so many people that are living on this earth going through what I'm going through that know it's real.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just so hard to hear someone say it's not real. And my 8-year-old, he lost, and he's old, he knows, and he was going to school. Once they started going to school, and he would ask questions like, Mom, like, is COVID real? Isn't it real? Because he hears it at school. And like, he would tell me that he would say, COVID is real. I lost my papa and my nana. Like, my grandparents died. And it's just sad that an 8-year-old has to also, be on that front line.
Yeah.
But it's the world we're in.
It is.
I just feel like all of us here are now here getting through this, but we are the voices, of our loved ones, and we are here to advocate like for them and say, hey, this is real. This is no joke.
Yeah. And telling their stories.
Exactly. And thank you so much for doing this and for sharing our stories and sharing your story. And this is like this is therapeutic. This is a place for all of us to come together and support each other, because we all understand.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Loretta. Thank you so much for sharing today about your parents.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And that's the show, everyone. If you've lost a loved one to COVID and would like to share your story on the show, please send me an email. My email address is forthosewelostpodcast@gmail.com. This show won't ever have a members area or episodes that you have to pay to listen to, but there are expenses to hosting a podcast, and if you'd like to help, you can support this show at buymeacoffee.com/forthosewelost. The link is in the show notes below. And if you're still listening, and thank you so much if you are, if you like this episode, please share it with your friends, share it on your social media, and once you've done that, please rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts, because that's where most of our new listeners come from. Ratings and reviews are the main way this podcast finds new listeners. So please share the show. Until next time.